Yeah, mastering. Yeah, we did talk about that too. And mastering, the process of mastering used to be very critical because it was important to be able to take what was recorded on tape and transfer it most accurately to a master stamper that you could stamp out discs, these vinyl discs, so that everybody could get a product. And then depending on how your stereo was, of course, they had to do filtering and technical stuff to make the music fit on the disc accurately and get enough information on one disc, like the RIAA filtering, where they filter out the bottom end of the music, but then your stereo, when you plug in your turntable, is supposed to reinstate the bottom end, almost like a zip file. You zip it and then unzip it. Problem is that if you got a very inexpensive stereo from Sears, it's going to sound a lot different than the super high-end stereo in terms of the accuracy of those things. And so the audiophile would say, you're not really hearing it the way it was intended. But then again, I'm kind of combative about that kind of concept, because who cares if you like it, right? Even if you're listening on a cheap stereo. If you like it, you like it. I listen to mono transistor radios and love the music because I love the music. So I think that those things are secondary, but the process of mastering was more of a technical process. And then in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, it became more of a creative process because mastering engineers started trying to fix bad mixes. So can you make the vocal louder without us having to go back and remix? And so they would EQ it and compress it in just such a way that they could get more out of certain frequency ranges. And then, of course, they got famous for making hit records, and then got managers and lawyers and percentages of records and all that kind of stuff. Bob Ludwig was one of the most famous mastering engineers. The process of mastering today is still, it's not necessary. You could do a mix and put it on a digital format, that would be fine. But the real reason why you master in general is to keep consistencies of level, consistencies of sonics, so that when one song plays from one artist and then your song plays, it's consistent. So it'll sound like a polished, finished product. And I always feel like the song isn't really complete until it's mastered. And it's consistent with other products that are either being played on terrestrial radio or streamed or whatever, and it needs to be consistent. Because if it isn't consistent, if somebody's dying to turn the radio down or turn it up, you're not helping yourself in terms of exploiting and presenting your product. Certainly you want it to sound better than the next guy, but you don't want it to be too quiet so people turn up the radio and then when the next song comes on, it blows them away. That's the basic process, and it basically entails compression, limiting dynamics, and as I mentioned before, everything sounds better compressed. As you master, everything comes out a little more, everything harmonic structure, and actually it ties back into spectrums. So when you compress more, the loudest frequency, which is the fundamental, gets pushed into the harmonic structure, and in perspective, there's more harmonic structure to be heard compared to fundamental frequencies, and so everything sounds more real, more lifelike. So when you compress and when you master, everything sounds more complete, more real. It's a great process, not only technically to keep everything consistent, but also for the sonics of the project. So it's compression and EQ are basically what's used, and also sophisticated dithering devices to make sure that it dithers properly, and so you get the best quality sound. Even though it's not necessary, it's advisable. It used to be necessary just to sell a record. Now it's not necessary. Q stands for quality. What it means is that the bandwidth, meaning how wide of a frequency range you're affecting by using the EQ at a specific frequency, is wider than it is how much you add or subtract of that frequency. So it's a wider bunch of frequencies you affect when you use a low Q. When you use a high Q, it means it's very focused, very quality oriented on one specific frequency. That's why I use a wide Q, because it's very difficult for me, even with years of doing this, to say, oh, that frequency I'm looking for is 1.23 kilohertz. Because your ears are good, but some people claim that they can do that, but I don't believe people can. So I basically start with a wider approach and try to encompass what I'm looking for in a wide way, and then try to narrow it down as I go along and try to figure it out a little more. But if you use a wide cue, you can't really go wrong. It's like target shooting with a shotgun. You kind of go everywhere and you hit the target, and then you can refine your spots a little more. There is another technique for EQing, which I discussed that I didn't bring up again, which I think is brilliant, is basically taking each sound element and taking an EQ and making it a very tight cue and adding a lot of it, like 10, 15 dB, and then sweeping it in the frequency domain to find the most irritating frequency you can find in that one specific sound, and then backing it down about a decibel and widening the cue. And if you do that on every sound before you even start mixing, then you never have a lot of irritating, harsh frequencies in any sound that you're working with. That's if you're going to mix a jazz record or an adult sounding record, because as we mentioned before, some records are intended to be harsh and irritating. Some punk records I've made, they intended to be really irritating because their subject matter was they wanted to be in your face. So depending on the style of music, R&B is different than jazz, pop's different than reggae, they're all different. And so understanding the genre and being musical with what you're doing is super important to it. And actually being a musician a little bit when you're doing a mix. There are some engineers that are strictly engineers. I think the best engineers are guys that, or women that come from a musical background and understand the language of music and what kind of emotions you're trying to bring out of a song.